Welcome. So, in this video, I will be speaking about perfectionism and how I call myself a recovering perfectionist, the impact that perfectionism has had on my life personally, how I've started to shift some of those perfectionist behaviors and ways that you can as well. So, I say that I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I also think that before I even called myself a recovering perfectionist, I didn't even think that I was a perfectionist. And I once was in this leadership training about a year and a half ago, and we were doing this exercise where everyone in the whole group, the community, was giving each individual person feedback on what their impact is and feedback on when they show up in a room, what's the general sense that the community gets from them being present. So really about feedback on your impact. And a piece of feedback that I received was that I was calculated and that I had to be and look perfect. And I was like, wait, what? I had all these beliefs that I was this loose, flowing, free spirit. I was the one that didn't need to look perfect. I was the one that could just sort of show up and just be really fluid with whatever was coming. I wasn't calculated. And so this feedback, as you can tell, really took me by surprise. And at first I resisted it. And at first I was like, that's not true. I'm not a perfectionist, blah, blah, blah. And Carl Jung has this incredible quote that I think about all the time: what we resist persists. And so the very fact that there was resistance to that feedback, and the very fact that there was sort of an angry reaction to that feedback, is pretty much confirmation that there was something for me to pay attention to there, and that there could be some helpful truth behind the feedback that I received. So over time, I was able to open up to that feedback that potentially I was calculated and potentially I was a perfectionist, and that I started to, as I became more comfortable with that reality, I started to see all the ways in which perfectionism was hijacking my life, and all the ways that it held me back, it kept me playing small, that it got in the way of my relationships and my connections and my potential, and all of these things that were actually having really harmful, detrimental, unhelpful impacts on my life. And so this work over the last couple of years for me on breaking free of so many of those patterns and so many of those beliefs and programming around perfectionism has revolutionized my life. And I really hope that this can help you as well, and that I can plant some seeds right now, and if they resonate, to start looking further, to start getting more curious. And before I go any further, I just want to clarify and really define what I mean by perfectionism. And I'm a huge Brene Brown fan, and I know that she's pretty big these days, so maybe you love her as well, and you've read some of her work. And she speaks a lot about perfectionism. And for those of you that don't know Brene Brown, she's this incredible researcher, writer, and professor who spent a decade studying vulnerability, courage, shame, and has really been instrumental in gaining clarity and insight into my historically closeted perfectionist nature, and with a lot of the women that I work with. So she's amazing. If you don't know her work, go read Daring Greatly or Rising Strong. Are both really incredible books. Cool. So Brown says perfectionism is the belief that if we live perfect, look perfect, and act perfect, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. I'll say that again. Perfectionism is the belief that if we live perfect, look perfect, and act perfect, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. So my perfectionism was really a cover-up, or has been a cover-up, and this sort of protective shield to avoid a deep-rooted fear of failure, And really, it's been this way for me to hide from the possibility of failure and to hide from the potential for feeling rejected by other people. And she goes on to explain that perfectionism is a 20-ton shield that we lug around thinking it will protect us, when in fact, it's the very thing that's really preventing us from flight. So, in an attempt to falsely shield myself from failure through this mechanism of perfectionism, I also cut myself off from the possibility of really being seen, and not just the parts that are that I want to celebrate, the parts that I love, the parts that are beautiful about me, but actually the parts, it's just like, what is it for all of me to be seen? So the parts that are maybe darker, the parts that are more uncomfortable to talk about, the parts that I want to hide or keep hidden from myself and from the world. And I'm not going to talk about this too much in this video, but often it's what's called the shadow. So the shadow parts of myself, or what I was keeping hidden, the shadow parts of myself, or what I've shielded, and what so much of my perfectionism was shielding. And I'm going to go into the shadow in a later video. And, for now, all that I'm saying, like when I talk about perfectionism, I've done a lot of work in clarifying what it means and trying to build awareness of how it impacts my life. That doesn't mean by any means that like I've got this figured out. It doesn't mean by any means that I never have little patterns show up anymore. It's just I have more awareness of when those patterns show up, and more awareness equals choice. So when I have more choice, there's more freedom. And so I then get to choose how I want to respond to my life, instead of being hijacked by this unconscious behavioral pattern to look perfect and act perfect all the time. So, and I say it, and perfectionism is actually an impossible reality because it doesn't exist. And Tony Robbins also says that perfectionism is the lowest possible standard because it doesn't even exist. So it's like guaranteed you're going to feel disappointed, like guaranteed you're going to feel let down because it's not even real. So what I have, or some of the ways in which perfectionism really impacted my life in these sort of like covert ways, is being really self-critical, never feeling like I was enough, or never feeling like I was where I wanted to be. It also caused me to be critical of others. So in the same way that I held myself to those impossible standards of perfections, I would hold other people to those same impossible standards, and therefore would be critical for them when they inevitably fell short of those impossible standards, because they're not even real. They're idealizations. I started to disconnect from my emotions. And so my emotions would really take a back seat when I allowed perfectionism to drive me. And so I would cut myself off from feeling a lot of more uncomfortable emotions, because I didn't want to feel, I wanted to avoid them. And so avoiding my emotions is avoiding so much of life and so much of feeling life, and not just like living in my head and trying to convince myself of things, or only focusing on my mental body. It's like to cut myself off is feeling detached, is feeling numb, is feeling cut off from life. And another way in which it really impacted me was playing small. It's like, and I would have like a paralyzing fear of being wrong or failing. And I'm going to get into a whole video another time around reframing this concept of failure. But because I was so afraid of failing, or so afraid of getting it wrong, whatever the fuck that means, I would actually not even try. I wouldn't put myself in the arena. And so I would play small. I would hide. I would stay like sort of contained. And that was preventing me from really stepping into my potential, from really stepping into the driver's seat of my life, and from really being seen. And in being seen, really being connected from a place of sincerity with the people around me, and also feeling really deeply connected to myself. And, some of the ways that I have become, some of the really helpful ways that I've overcome the perfectionism is when I have a thought, instead of like obsessively thinking about it, like, oh, how is this going to be received? Like, what are people going to think about me? Whatever the obsessive thoughts are, I just say it. I'm just like, all right, here's the thing I want to just practice saying right now. And even if it is a ridiculous thought, or even whatever that means, but even if it is something that doesn't land well with others, it's like, who gives a shit? Actually, so just this practice of like radical expression and just saying whatever I want to say, and not hold back. So that's something that's been really helpful for me, and getting myself, or saying yes to things that scare the shit out of me has also been a way of overcoming my perfectionism. So saying yes to things that scare me and things that I know I'm not good at. So oftentimes I say yes really quickly to the things I know I'll excel at. And it's been cool to be like, yeah, like I'll try to go rock climbing right now, or yes, I'll go sit on that panel and present to a group of 50 people, or yes, I'll go and like practice surf of some, like whatever it is, things that I'm not good at. I intentionally say yes for the sake of like putting myself in the arena of like of learning, of growing, of getting, improving, and getting better at something, and not beating myself up if I fail, but instead choosing to keep showing up and keep trying and keep practicing. So instead of failure, it's practice. And again, this has been such an instrumental tool in my life, and I see it everywhere around me. I see it a lot with women in particular. So it just feels like such a important conversation for women to be having. It's like, it's okay to be seen. It's okay for those darker parts of ourselves to be expressed. It's okay to not have it all figured out. It's okay to get messy in the arena of life. And that's the place that we really start to grow and thrive, and experience life and experience our emotions and connect and all the things that we want from life. So notice those perfectionist habits that might show up in your life. And again, bringing that awareness and attention to those patterns and to those beliefs will start to support you in choosing a different path. And life is way more interesting when you're less obsessed with being perfect and you're more interested in just experiencing life.